We need to start then by bringing in a Fusion composition. So this is a blank Fusion comp. As long as the playhead is over the top of the composition or touching it, then what we can do is then go to Fusion. Inside Fusion, we've just got the one node, which is the media out. This sends the information back to the timeline. I've got my control bar in the middle with all my tools on. I'm going to drag in a background node, and then I will take the background node and connect it to the media out. I'm going to rename the background node to canvas because this background node is going to be the canvas. And then in the inspector, I'm going to take the alpha to 0. So we've got a transparent background. I'm going to have a nice gradient background on here. So we're going to bring in another background node and connect this to the canvas, and that will connect with a merge. And then in the background node, we're going to rename it. So this is going to be my background color. Inside the inspector, we've got our color controls. And I'm going to change the type from solid to gradient. I then want to change the gradient type to radial. A radial gradient ends up over on the left hand side of the screen. So I need to come here where we've got the start of the gradient and put in 0.5 to put it in the center. We're going to adjust the colors. I'm just going to have two colors in this, and these triangles below this gradient bar here represent the colors. I'm going to select the first one. And I'm going to select the color picker because I have a hexadecimal color that I'm going to put in here and select OK. So that's the first color. Back into the inspector, and we're going to select the other triangle, and then we're going to open the color picker. And again, I've got a hexadecimal color to put in here and select OK. So now I've got my background on the screen ready to add my shapes and my output. I'm going to be using S shapes to build my progress bar. I've actually got, if I come to the end of the toolbar in the middle, right click, I have got my own custom toolbar. And I'm going to bring in this shape here, the one I can't pronounce. And I'm bringing this in because it will give me more choices than just round. Because I've got a S shape, I need a renderer. So I'm going to bring a renderer in, connect my S shape to my renderer. If we just take the output of the render and hover over the output and the merge, it will create that extra merge for us. That saves a little bit of time. I don't want a solid color, I want a border, so I'm going to select my shape and come up into the inspector and just uncheck solid, and then I need to give it a border width. So we've got a border width on it now, and we can see it, and we can change the number of sides, which gives us completely different shapes for our progress bar. One thing to be aware of, if we come down to length and drop the length to 0, we can still see the border on the screen. And this is actually the border's end cap. If we look at border style on the left, we can see we've got rounded, square, and then we've got flat. We need to make sure we select flat. The line that goes through the icon is the end of the border. So it's important to select flat, and then when our progress bar finishes, we've got nothing left on the screen. Let's bring this back up. We could use the width and the height to create even more shapes, but I want to keep this symmetrical. So what I'm going to do is connect the width and the height together using a pick whip. But I wanted to show you that what you can do is come over height, right click, and you can select expression. This will give us an expression field and the pick whip. In the expression field, we've actually got the default value, which is 0.5. There is another way if you don't need the default value. If we come into the actual value and type equals and press enter, we get the same expression field, but it's empty, and that way you could work with a clean expression. But in this case, we're just going to use the pick whip and connect the height to the width. You'll notice in the expression field, we've got the word width, which is an expression in itself, because it's referring to the control, which is the width inside this node. Now in the future, I'm going to do a series on expressions, but at the moment, we're just going to build our progress bar or our multi-timer by using expressions rather than anim curves. We're just going to do something a little bit different to show you these techniques. For now, I'm going to leave this node alone, although I do need to work a lot more in this node, but I just want to get my visuals on screen first before I start adding expressions and animation. What I'm going to do is we're going to have an inner circle, and the way I'm going to do that, I'm actually going to highlight the shape, right click, and I'm going to copy it, and then just below it, I'm going to right click and I'm going to paste an instance. And an instance is exactly the same node. If you look at the code, this instance is actually inside the original node, which means it's really good for caching. You'll notice I haven't got the green line, and that's because I've started switching them off. We can come to options and we can show instance links. So that's that green line there that we can see. I've started switching them off because what I can do on a complex node tree, I can just use the naming convention. So if I come in here and I do I shape, I now know that's an instance of an S shape. And here I'm just going to F2 and press S. So now I've got my S shape and I've got my instance. It doesn't matter on a small composition, but on a large composition, they end up everywhere and it looks really, really messy. Because it is a S shape, I need another render. So we'll bring a render in here, connect to the render, and then we'll connect the render to that merge one. And now I've got two S shapes, but they are over the top of each other. So I'm going to come into my I S shape, my instance, and this is because I need to disconnect or de-instance some of the controls. I'm actually going to come over and de-instance the border width because I'm thinking of having a different border width. I'm also going to de-instance the length, and this is because I might decide as an improvement to have the outer going clockwise and the inner going anti-clockwise. So I'm going to control them differently. I'm then going to come to the width and I'm going to de-instance the width. I also need to de-instance the height. Even though they're connected together, they need to be de-instanced separately. What I've got now is, although the width and height here are still connected, I can make this smaller. We now get our inside shape or border. I'm going to come up to style and I'm going to de-instance the whole of the color group. And the way to do that, just come over the red and then I can de-instance the color group, all of it in one go. Just give it a different color before we set things up. I'm actually going to control these differently. I'm going to control them from another node where I can just display the color picker in the inspector rather than all the colors in the inspector. Started up the node tree a little bit because I'm going to bring in a text node, and then the text node I'm going to connect to the merge, and this will create another merge. I'm not going to use the text node by default. We're going to modify it. We're going to customize this text node by adding some controls because I want to add the 4 expressions to generate the outputs I want. I'm going to start by right clicking and selecting edit controls, which will bring up our edit control panel. And we're going to start by creating a new control. We're going to call it percentage up. We want it to be text. We're going to leave it in the user. We want it animatable because we're going to add expression to it. Then we want a text edit control. Actually just generates a text field for us. We want it 1 line high and we select OK. Looking in the inspector, if we go to user, we can now see we've got that percentage up text field there. These text fields don't output to the screen, only the text field on the text, this style text field here, outputs to the screen, but we're going to collect all the information we want first and then send it to the screen using an if statement. I'm going to create another one, come down to the node, right click, edit controls. This is going to be percentage down, it's going to be text, in user, animatable, text edit control, 1 line high, and again, edit controls. This is going to be count up seconds, text, user, animatable, edit controls, 1 line high, and we've got this now. One more, we're going to do edit controls, count down seconds, text, user, animatable, text edit controls, 1 line high, and now we've got these in the inspector. I now need to put some expressions into these to generate my output. I'm going to come to percentage up, right click, come down to expression, and it gives me an expression field, but I don't need this text in here, so I'm going to get rid of that. And where do we find our expressions? Well, I'm using DaVinci Resolve Fusion Studio. I can come to workspace and use my expression builder. And then with the expression builder, I can just come to search and I can type in here count or counter. It will search as soon as you start typing. And what I'm looking for is count up in percentages. So here we go, returns percentage of the composition length from 0% to 100. There are 2 expressions in here, and this one here has actually got the percentage sign concatenated at the end. So I can just select that, copy it, and then paste this in the expression field. And this now gives us the output of counting up percentages. Percentage down, we're going to right click, expression, clear the field. And then again, I'm going to come back to my expression builder, search. In the search, I'm going to type in count, and I want to come down to the one below it, which is from 100% to 0%. Highlight this, select this, copy it, come into our inspector and paste that in there. Now we've got the up and down percentage. Count up in seconds, again, expression, clear that expression field. Let's have a look in the expression builder. I could put the expression builder on another monitor and leave it open, but because my screen recorder is only recording one monitor, that's why I keep closing it. I'm going to put count in here again, and we've got lots of options in here. Results in counting up in seconds, useful when FPS is not known. Now this is good to use this bit here where it says comp, well it's get preference, comp, get prefs, comp, frame rate. Because if you're sending it to somebody and you don't know the frame rate, it doesn't matter. I'll copy that and paste that in this field, and now we've got seconds going up. And the last one, count down, so expression, clear that field, back to expression builder, search, count, and I want to count down. Here we go, results in counting down in seconds based on the comp length. Well, that's what we're looking for. Highlight that, copy that, and paste that in there. So now I've got my outputs ready to bring in to my style text node with an if statement. Before I put an if statement into the style text, what we need to do is to have a combo box so we can actually select these options. And normally I'd put it in an M1 node, so that's just a merge node that I've renamed. But I am going to add it to this text node, and that's going to make my if statement a lot shorter. I won't have to add the M1 bit of the node in. Don't worry about it, I'm just going to show you. So I'm going to come into here, I'm going to go edit controls, and then I'm going to, so we're going to call this control counter type. It's going to be number and user. Don't really need it animatable, and it can be passive. It's going to be a combo box. And then in here, we're going to have percentage up and percentage down. And I'm going to have count up seconds and the count down in seconds. I'm going to put a width in because I'll actually put it in the code. Don't have to. And now I've got my combo box here ready to be part of my if statement. I'm now ready to create my if statement for this text, so I can right click on here and have expression, and then we can clear that out. Now this box is a bit small for creating this, so again I can come to workflow integrations, expression builder, and I can build it in here. The way we're going to do it, first of all, it's going to be an if statement, so if, then we have a open bracket or parentheses. We're then going to have the name of the control, which is actually counter type. We call it counter type, and then we want it to be equals equals, which means exactly equals. No other choices other than that. Now the thing is with, I'm going to put this on another screen to show you this. If we come into user, with these combo boxes, the first one value is 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, which can catch people out because it's all based on Lua. If I bring that back in here, what we then say is if the counter type is 0, we then put a comma, and well, what do we want to do? Well, we actually want this to be, if it's 0, we want it to display percentage up, and it's really important that you spell that correctly. It's also got to be the same case, so we've got the capital P and then the capital UP. Now one thing that's important for a text node, a style text, is after this we need to put dot value, and the reason for this is all expressions calculate every single frame, and we could either give it a frame, we could give it frame 0, or we could give it frame 10. It doesn't really matter, but what this is going to do, dot value, is going to check every single frame. We're then going to put another comma. What we're going to do, we're actually going to nest if statements, and I'm going to show you a quick way of doing that. Because what will happen at the end of these if statements is I'm going to have just something that says error, and then I'm going to close bracket. what it's saying is if we're on 0, then we're going to display what's in this percentage up field. If not, it's going to be an error. Now, the reason I've done this is because what we can do now is we can just highlight all this and copy it. And then over the word error, including those quotation marks, I can paste it in. And now we can just change that to 1. And then in here, I can change that to down. So I've got 2 nested. And what this is helping me do is keep the correct number of brackets, because there must be the same number of brackets. I can then come in here again and highlight this. And I can paste in the if statement again. This one will be 2. And then this is going to be count up seconds. We then go one more time. I'm going to paste it in there. And then this is going to be 3. And this is going to be count down seconds. And there we go. And by doing it that way, what has happened is I've got the correct number of if statements and I've got the correct number of brackets. I can check it against what is here, but I'm also going to save this just in case. So let's call it counter type if.txt. And then I can save this. Let's save it in there. And then I can copy this. I'm going to move this onto another screen. We'll come into the inspector, select text, and then in here, in the expression field, I can paste it. And then that's pasted it in here. So what we've got now, it's saying here that we have percentage up. So let's test it. It's going from 0 upwards. We've then got percentage down. So let's test it. We're going from 100 down. Then got count up in seconds. And this is taking into consideration the frames per second, count down in seconds, and that again is taking FPS into account. So we've created an if statement in the expression builder, and we've used it to bring in what we want into this text node. Next, I just need to deal with the borders. So I'm going to come into the first shape. And then in the inspector on the length, I'm just going to use anim curves. It's so much easier. For right click, modify with anim curves. That gives me the modifier tab in the top right. Selecting this gives me the anim curve controls. I just change transition to duration, leave it linear because I don't want an easing curve on this. You could have one if you wanted to, and we could give these controls to the end user. I'm going to invert it, and then it's on by default. And as we have the countdown, then it slowly disappears. And we'll leave that as user defined. I'm going to come into the instance and do the same. We did de-instance these. So I'm going to modify anim curves, duration and invert. That means they go together. Or we could unselect that and have them going in opposite directions. Lots of options there. And I'm going to leave that for the user to decide what they have. The next stage is I'm going to show you about wireless nodes. We don't need it in this composition because this composition isn't that big, but I'll show you how they work. I'm going to grab these nodes here, which are my S shape. So this is my progress bar. I'm going to disconnect them from the flow. We'll connect that back up there. So now these are completely separate. And the reason I've done this is because after merge 2, so we select merge 2, I'm going to add a transform. And this is so I can resize and reposition just the progress bar anywhere on the screen separate from the text. I'm going to connect this to merge 1, and we don't see anything in the viewer. And that's because this merge 3 requires a background. But did you know that if we come to merge 3 and we do Control and T and switch them, because this S shape here, it's going into the background, we can see it. So a merge can actually take one input as long as that input is on the background. So the rule is a merge must have a background. And this will help tremendously because we don't need to plug anything in here. If we switch it back, what we'd normally do, I've had to move them up too soon, we'd connect the canvas to the background so we can see it. But in a busy node tree where you've got lots of nodes or it's a big composition, this canvas might be a fair distance away and you might be dragging your pipe all the way over your nodes, etc. So there is a node that's really useful, and it's the wireless node. So if we go shift and space and type in wire, then we can see wireless link here. So we've added the wireless link, we connect this to the background and we don't see anything. And that's because this wireless link is empty. If we look in the inspector, we can see it's looking for an input. We can type any node name in there and it will connect. Or if we come to canvas, click and drag the canvas up here and let go, it will then input the canvas for us. And what is happening is the canvas is actually connected to the merge 3 via this empty node here, which is a wireless link. And this is really useful as a node if it's really busy and you want to put the canvas and plug it into lots of different nodes. Instead of having the pipe all over the place and all over your screen and across your nodes, what you can do is just use a wireless link. I'm now going to set up the color picker, which doesn't have the red, green, blue and alpha sliders underneath it. What I'm actually going to do is steal a control from another node. And that node's going to be the text node. So if we bring the text node here, we're going to set it here. We're not going to connect it in the flow. We're just going to use the control from this node. If we look inside the inspector, we can see that on the text section, we've got the color picker here without the red, green, blue sliders below. Now this color picker here is actually a clone of a tool. It's got different code behind it. And I think in the future I might be able to make a node which just has specific tools in. But if we come to the shading section here, we can see element 1, this is what we're looking at. So we're looking at the color here that we've got red, green, blue, alpha, but that is controlled by the color picker on the text page. I'm going to pin this open. I'm going to select me S shape. And in the S shape controls here, I'm going to go to styles, and we've got the color here of the shape, and all I'm going to do is pick whip them together. I'm going to go expression, take the pick whip, come down to red, do the same for green, blue and alpha. All my controls here are now connected to my text. If I come into the text, I've got this color picker here that I can open up and I can change the color, and I don't need red, green, blue and alpha with that. And that's what I can put inside the controls in the inspector when I make my macro. Another advantage is if I come to the text, I'm going to give it a name. We're going to call it outer color, and that's so I can see it in the macro. But because this isn't connected to the flow, I can right click, come to modes, and then go pass through or control and P, and it's going to switch this node off. So all I'm using is a control from this node, but the node's not going to render and it's not going to do anything else, which makes it really useful if you want a color picker without red, green, blue and alpha. Let's do the inner one, so we'll bring that in. Just need to unpin the first one, we'll pin this one, pick the other shape. Now this was an instance, so when we go into styles, if you remember, we de-instance so we could have a different color, but then we'll open the shading, we can connect these again with a pick whip. They're now all connected up, and they're going to be driven by this control here. Come back to my nodes, give it a name, and then right click, modes, pass through, and we've switched that node off. And that is how you use the text color to drive any other color when you don't want a red, green, blue alpha slider in the inspector. I've decided I'm going to have some basic and advanced controls in the inspector, so I'm going to come down to the merge one, and I'm going to rename that M1, and that's for my code snippet. But also in here I'm going to right click, edit controls. I'm going to create a new control. I'm just going to name it CP for control panel. I want it to be in the user page, don't need it to be animatable. I'm going to make it passive, which means it's not going to render, and it's going to be a multi-button. First button is going to be called basic, and then the second button is going to be called advanced. And that way I can use these basic and advanced buttons to select my controls. I'm going to have all these selected, and that's so the code is added into the node, and when I edit the code I don't have to type a lot of extra code. Size and width, we'll just leave that the same, select OK, and now in the user we've got these two buttons here that we can use for basic and advanced. And it's also nice to see that they fixed this, because this used to come out as a combo box. So we've got them set up, and we're going to use them inside our macro. I've tidied things up a little bit, changed some of the sizes in the screen, and now I'm going to make a macro. I've already made a macro video previously, and the link will be in the description, but because we've got 2 nodes out the flow, I'm going to record this as well so you can see what I do with these. With any macro, to make life easier, you just select the nodes in the order you want to see the controls in the inspector. So I'm going to start with the outer, hold down the control key, inner, background, shapes, transform, text, and then I want this M1 to be last, so I'm going to select everything else. You could just press Control and A and it will now select everything else, but you'll need to deselect the media out. And I'm going to select the M1 last. Now right click and go macro, create macro, and we've got the macro here. Let's make sure we've got everything here, and we're going to give it a name. You'll notice with the list of the nodes merge 4, then because we haven't selected the media out, merge 4 needs this output available, so it will connect to the media out. But the nodes which are outside the flow also have outputs, and we need to make sure we remove them because they will cause us problems. We can fix it in post in the code, but it's easier just to open these, and we want to uncheck the output. We don't want an output because they're not connected to the flow. While we're in here, we can come to the text section, and you'll notice the color says clone, and that's how we get the color picker without the sliders. So we're going to select them. We need to do the same with the inner. We don't want the output, and then we're going to pick the colors. Next, I've got the background color. Because I've got gradients, I'm going to pick all these. Got all my color picked. I'm now going to come to the S shape. Not sure what controls I need, so I'm going to double click inside the work area. I'm going to double click on the tool itself, the node itself, and now I can see the controls. Definitely want size, border width. I'm going to give position as an advanced control. I'm going to have X and Y offset as advanced control, and width may also be an advanced control because we're going to have a transform which keeps things symmetrical. That's everything in there, but we've got the modifier. The modifier is anim curves. If we hover over here, then we can identify that it's anim curves 1. And I'm going to select all these. Once I've done that, I've got my instance of my shape. So I'm going to double click this because a lot of these controls are already connected. The border width I can control, and then the width I can control. Everything else is connected to the original node. Then got anim curves 2, so the modifier in here, this is anim curves 2. I'm going to select all these. XF, this is my transform for moving my progress bars separately. Center, size and angle. And my text. We don't need the style text because that's generated by expressions, but we'll take the font, the style and the color, and we'll do tracking as well just in case we need it. Then everything else, we don't need the controls. So I'm going to come to File, Save as Group. I have Quick Access Pop-Up installed, so I can just go straight to my titles folder, come into my timers folder, and then save this out. And this is now available on the edit and the cut page. We go to the edit page. Inside timers, we've got here the multi-control, and at the top you can see we've got the colors without the red, green, blue, and then I need to tidy up everything else. So that's this section. The next section is I'm going to tidy up the inspector.